Hey everybody, and welcome to Chew Stream, where we talk about art and life as an artist. I'm your host, Bobby Chew, and we also have my co-host, as always, Matt Johnson on the stream. Say hi, Matt.
Hey, everybody.
And today is a special day. You know what? Sometimes I throw that word around a little bit, but today is a very special day because today we have a super special guest, our newest Schoolism instructor, Victoria Ying. Hey, Vicky.
Hi guys. Hey everybody.
So, Vicky, you're starting your class today, so that's why and your class, for those of you that don't know, is Introduction with Visual or to Visual Development with Victoria Ying. So I thought it'd be a good idea to get you online, and that way people can also ask you, live and interactive questions about visual development and things like that. I want to start off with the very first question, which is what does it take to work in visual development? You know, a lot of people, they might not know the kind of skill sets that they need and things like that. So I thought we could start off there.
Sure. So visual development is a really exciting field because you kind of get to do the best parts of visual storytelling. But that, of course, that requires us to kind of have a basic grasp of character design, perspective, and most of all is actually design thinking. So just because you can draw really well or you can really render something really well, it doesn't actually make you a good visual development artist, because what you actually really need is that design-minded thinking to be able to come up with a new and exciting idea that no one has ever seen before.
Isn't that the thing, though? You know, it's like every
Yeah.
director is like, oh, what do you want to do with this film? Well, I want it to be something that no one's ever seen
Yeah.
before. But yet, there's kind of like limitations to that as well, because you still want it to be familiar, right? Like you
Yeah.
always hear new and nobody's ever seen
Mhm.
before, yet familiar in a way. Can we
I
talk a
mean,
little bit about that? What do they
yeah,
mean by that?
definitely. I think that when people are looking for that, what they're saying is that they want it to be understandable by your audience. In our culture, obviously we have a certain number of tropes, certain things that just cue us into what's happening or how we should feel about something. And in my class, we talk a lot about how to communicate emotion and how to do that just by design. Like, how do you design an object that's going to make you feel a certain way? And I think that that's kind of the thing that we're looking for. Yes, you can come up with like some crazy concept, but if you can communicate the emotion that's supposed to be clear on the screen and what the story is supposed to be, then that's actually much more important than a super crazy new concept.
And it's been a little bit before I did my last stream, so I also wanted to mention a little housekeeping that it is interactive. So if you have questions, just go to slido.com, hashtag ChewStream, and you can ask your questions there. And the best thing of all is that you don't have to sign up for an account or anything like that. This is simply just asking questions, and you can vote on your favorite questions, and those will rise to the top, and those are the ones that we'll talk about first. So Matt, why don't we go to the very first question? Sound good?
Yeah, that sounds great. Comical Foods asks, when creating visual development for your personal projects, how do you approach designing unique environments and characters?
Well, I think that for visual development, especially if you're coming from a story minded place, which most of our own personal projects start from a story, you're definitely going to want to try to define what that emotion is and then try to pick up imagery that right. So if it's something that's angry, there's a lot of ways. If you look at reference online, you can kind of start to parse through maybe interesting things that people haven't necessarily done before. Like a good example to me is Hades, who's the villain from Hercules. Like, he's kind of all about anger and fire, but they didn't actually depict him as red. They actually depicted him as blue, and that's a very like clear choice that they made, but still communicates exactly like what kind of character this is, while still coming from a place of really strong emotion.
Yeah, that's really interesting because Also, there's been a lot of remakes recently from,
Hmm.
especially at Disney, from the old classic movies to now live action, and then some of them people love, like Winnie the Pooh. I just see like all these wonderful comments about how awesome the design is, and then
Hmm.
there's movies where everybody just hates and they're like, what is this design? You ruined the character. Even though people are trying to do something new,
Hmm.
sometimes they turn the wrong direction. Like
Yeah.
Venom. Venom got a lot of blowback when
Mm.
people start to see that at first. And then um, the newest one is Aladdin.
Yeah.
People hated the fact that Will Smith wasn't blue at first. And then
Mhm.
they showed him blue, and then everybody hated that too.
Yeah.
Can
I mean, it's definitely challenging, especially when you're taking a beloved property and then you're going to, do something with it. And I think that in their situation, it's very difficult because it's almost impossible to please everybody. When you get like a direct translation, like what Beauty and the Beast was, which was basically just the animated film in live action, I think that that's not very satisfying for a lot of viewers because it's like, oh, well, I already saw this. And in a way that like takes away a lot of its charm when you make it live action. However, like certain films, like I think Jungle Book, the newest one that they did, it wasn't a straight up retelling of the animated version. Like they used a lot of the same story beats, but at the same time, like I think it had something new and different to say. And I think that's what's most important when approaching either new properties or old properties. Like make sure that you're very clear about what it is that you want to say about this story.
Let's talk about this a little bit, and then let's include Matt in here as well because
Yeah.
some designs seem to work. Like what
Mhm.
you're saying, like Jungle Book, it's not the same, yet everybody loved the designs. And
Mhm.
then there's stuff like Aladdin, where it's not the same, but everybody hated the designs. And if it's too much of a literal kind of thing, then
Mhm.
maybe there's mixed emotions, or what do you think it is about like Venom or
Mhm.
Aladdin, like the genie in Aladdin, that
Yeah.
that the public is reacting to?
I mean, I do think a lot of it is nostalgia. It's like things that we loved as children, and then they're getting kind of remixed in a way that kind of ignores like our emotional attachment to those characters.
Mm.
And that's fine, I think, in a lot of ways. But I feel like if you're going to do that, like, again, you have to be saying something new with this character. You can't just be like, well, now it's Belle's dress, but it's, now it's made real and it's more detailed. And like, I actually really loved the Cinderella retelling that they did because it was a totally different story. And the costuming in it was so over the top and completely different than the film. Like, we weren't doing a straight up period piece, right? Like it was very remixed in a way where, very modern fashion was incorporated and it still like spoke to the character and it spoke to that story. So I think that yeah, what happens with those types of things is that we are so attached to them because that they've come from a place that we love, but seeing it kind of change in a way that doesn't add anything to it, I think is what
Mm.
turns a lot of people off.
You know what I also love that, yeah, I wish the studios could use somehow is now with designs where whether it's good or bad, the public doesn't react well to it.
Hmm.
Now there's artists that will come along and redesign it the way that they wanted to see
Yeah.
it, right? So you see like this beautiful design of Venom, and then
Hmm.
recently Rafael Grassetti at Sony Games, he
Hmm.
redesigned, Will Smith,
Yeah.
the genie, and everybody was like loving it.
I mean, I think
You-
that that's the other thing about our society now is that everything is so much more democratized. And
Mm.
like, if you have something else to say that you think is interesting, you'll find an audience for it. You'll find other people who agree with you. Like, you think back to like Claire Hummel's d- historically redesigns. And because she was drawing so much from the actual films, like she had something completely new and different to say that connected with a lot of people, especially costume nerds.
Yeah, for sure. Do you think that sometimes the motive behind a refresh has something to do with it in the sense that it could be, yeah, you know what I'm asking.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that's absolutely true too. I think that based on where you're coming from when you're doing a reboot, like, or even a sequel. I think the sequel has the same problem,
Mm,
right? Like,
that's
if
true.
you, yeah, if you, like when the Disney was doing a bunch of those straight to DVD sequels, like they weren't all great, and a big part of that was because the motivation behind making them was not about, oh, do we have something to say? Is there more story here? But nowadays, like with all the Pixar sequels and all the stuff that they're doing, every time that they make a sequel, they make sure that they're like, okay, actually, we have something more to say about these characters. There is a place that we can go with this that is authentic to our voice and the story that we're trying to tell. So
And
I think that, yeah, I think that you're right. The motivation definitely has something to do with it. And I think that nowadays more and more people are getting wise to, what's a cash grab and what's authentic.
yeah, for sure. Do you think that, like, for you as a visual developer, loving those characters and really being excited about those characters plays a big part in your work?
Yeah, I do think so. And I think you have to love your characters in order to do them justice. Even if it's not a character that's like beloved and something that, you grew up loving.
Hmm.
Like when we were working on Tangled and I was doing Rapunzel, like I had to actually get in her head and love her in the way that I would have if I had seen her in those classic Disney films in order for me to do her justice, in order for me to make
Mm.
her real. You can't just kind of be like, oh, well, I don't know, it's this character and she's just, a girl, because it's very transparent when it comes out that there wasn't a lot of thought in there. So, in order to make something lasting, anything, in order to make something that's impactful, like you have to have that emotional connection to your characters.
Now, before we go on to the next question, I also want to ask Vicky, um,
Hmm.
the person was asking about inspiration for your own projects, whether it's
Yep.
environment or characters. Where do you go to get that reference, to get that inspiration, besides just
Mm.
searching it on Google? Like, can we
Hmm.
get in depth about this? Because I find a lot of people, they have their
Yeah.
spots.
Hmm.
Hmm.
I mean, I think that like for inspiration and reference, like people are always asking me that question too. They're like, "Well, what do you do when you're stuck? What do you do when you can't come up with an idea?" Um, I think that a big part of it is kind of your own visual library that you've built up in your own mind. And obviously, it's not as easy as pointing and be like, "Oh, go to Google Images," but it is one of those things that requires you to be an interested person, someone who is curious and who wants to find out more about the world. Um, if you're constantly learning like that and you're constantly like, oh my God, that's so cool, that's so cool. You go to a museum and you look at the modern art, you look at stuff that isn't necessarily directly related to what you're doing, but you're building that visual vocabulary. You're building this baseline for yourself where you have a much broader library than other people. And so when you start to reach back into that to be like, okay, well, what is going to help me in this a specific scenario and all the things that you've built up in your own mind, it's a lot easier to kind of know what the keywords are, to know exactly like what I'm looking for. Like for example, when I was working on Frozen, one of our big inspirations was German expressionist film, which is not necessarily something that you see because it's not as clear direct translation, but because like our art director was very into those films and he incorporated a lot of those really graphic, really bold cinematic choices that definitely you can feel it in there, even if it's not like a one-to-one comparison. So for me, one of the things that it's a long game, it's not like like just go to this website or go to the library. Those things are great, but I think much more important is you constantly learning and constantly like pulling stuff that you are interested in and building your own like visual library and your own cache for yourself. So then, okay, so Neil Gaiman actually calls it the compost heap. So it's like, it's all this like food scraps, all this little stuff that you have, and you just kind of throw it in the compost heap. And you don't use exactly that scrap. Like you don't take exactly that little bit of dialogue that you wrote down when you were listening to other people talk. What you use is some of those cues, and then that compost heap kind of festers and grows, and then a whole new, idea comes from it. Like to encourage people to do is to just keep throwing stuff and hiding that stuff. And when you need it, you're going to have like this unique, special place that only you can really have. And that's kind of where I think most uniqueness comes from.
I'd
That's
just
a
like
great
to add to
analogy.
that just a little bit. So, A lot of times, when I'm looking for, if I'm doing something that has to be really realistic, then reference
Hmm.
all of a sudden becomes a much more, even more important kind of part to the process. So a lot of times I won't go to Google for images. I'll go to like certain films or
Hmm.
documentaries, especially, and I'll freeze frame stuff.
Yeah, for
Mm.
sure.
Then
I
nobody
also
can
think that
really.
film is such a great resource, especially for what we do as visual development artists, because I think that the thing most people don't understand is that film is not just like, oh, you just take a camera and you shoot, and then like it's exactly that thing. Like when they're making film, every shot is like so designed. Every single frame is something that a bunch of people worked really hard to like get the lighting just right and to, cheat all these different ways. So I love looking at film because yeah, it's much more akin to what we're creating. It's much more like an illustration than if you just look at, a photograph on Google Images.
And we're getting a lot of really good
Yeah,
questions
we are.
coming
There's a
in.
lot of good ones over here. Let's ask another one. Anonymous asks, how do you know if a design is good or bad? And can you give an example of bad character design and good character design?
Um, so good and bad are very subjective terms, and in a lot of ways, I don't know that there is such a thing as bad design. I think that there is such a thing as inappropriate design.
Mm.
If you have a character that's meant to communicate a certain emotion and then they don't, and then they just do the opposite, then yeah, I think that that is a failure in design, but it doesn't necessarily make it bad. Whenever I hear people say something like, "Oh, you should never have," I don't know, symmetrical characters or friendly characters always round. Like, I don't think that that's true either because everything is subjective, and every time that you create something, you're creating your own rules.
Okay,
So,
okay, but hold on. Sorry, Vicky.
yeah.
But like so say for like your class, for example, you're
Mhm.
teaching visual development,
Yep.
people are going to be handing stuff in. What are you going to be looking for?
Well, okay, so there's the two aspects of it, right? So we have the appropriateness of a design, which is does it communicate, does it work in the storytelling sense? But definitely, the thing that we're going to be talking about in my class is kind of how to break down a design in terms of its most abstract. So
Mm.
if we're looking just for something that's interesting, which is like what I think good design is, it's always about the idea of contrast and harmony. So like those two things have to be working together. I think that a good design has something that is both um, like harmonious, like everything seems to work together and seems to belong together, but at the same time has enough contrast that makes it interesting. So in my class, what we do is we actually take abstract shapes, like very simple, and how do we build something that is consistent and has interest, but at the same time is also not so contrasty that it's like wild and like hard to look at. So yes, in that sense, there is definitely something that we're always trying to strive for. And when you start thinking about design that way, you can look at anything and determine whether or not it has contrast and harmony and whether or not it works. So even stuff that you don't like let's say, I don't know, you're looking at a gallery of African masks, you can actually look at those and be able to determine, oh, that one's really cool, this one's really cool, and why.
Hmm.
Yeah, I really like the that exercise because also, especially if you're working on something that's going to be on screen, a lot of times you
Yeah.
don't get a lot of time to look at the character. You got to be able to read it like very, very quickly.
Mm.
So that exercise of using abstract shapes to give
Hmm.
you this feeling uh, is a very powerful one. Even though it could sound kind of simple in its
Yeah.
essence, right?
Yeah, and I
Well,
actually think that like I've done this exercise a few times in other classes that I've taught, and it's true. Like a lot of people are like, really, how is this going to help me in terms of technique? But it's not about technique because anyone can learn how to draw in perspective. What I need to teach you is actually how to think. How do you determine what is some like appealing to look at and what is not? So that's basically what that exercise is for, to actually remove content from whatever your design is, because I think that like when you're drawing a person, right, like there's so much there, we all know what a person looks like, there's so many different elements to creating a design, but if we remove that, if it's not and it's just shapes, like how do you determine and how much contrast to use and how much harmony to use? And I think that that is the best way to break down that principle, is to go as simple as possible.
Well, and you take something that's a simple abstract shape, like I saw a grid of blobs you had drawn
Mhm, yeah.
earlier in the video, and you were turning them into little mechanical parts and stuff like that. But then you also have to do that for the entire composition, right? Like,
Yeah,
so it's not just
exactly.
breaking down like a person's face, it's like this whole scene you're building,
Yeah.
correct?
Everything, I think that everything in design is all about harmony and contrast. Every single thing. So in terms
Yeah.
of color, like what colors to use in what proportion, that's also about harmony and contrast. Because if you have a whole painting that's all green, yeah, it's very harmonious, but it's not very interesting, right? So then if you add a little bit of red into it, then that's just enough contrast to make it interesting. So every single piece of making a composition or making a piece of art is all about those things.
That's great. This might help lead into another question we got. And this is a high level question, but very simple. What's the difference between visual development and concept art? I think we're all
So
very familiar about talking
yeah,
about concept art, you know?
right.
Yeah.
So actually, there isn't much of a difference in the actual work. It's a terminology thing. So concept art is a term that's used more in live action film and video games.
Mm,
Visual development is a term that was exclusively used by feature animation and TV animation for a very long time. And it wasn't until Marvel started using the phrase visual development that it started kind of coming more into
mm.
parlance to also mean concept art in film and TV or film and games. So it's just a term that is used pretty much interchangeably, and the job is pretty much the same if you're in film, games, or animation.
But there's also like a visual language behind an animated piece that's a little
That's true.
different, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's true. But that can also be in feature film, like live action film.
Mm,
And yeah, I think that the specifics of the job are always a little bit different, but in terms of like overall, like what we do, concept artists and visual development artists pretty much do the same things. And again, it varies from studio to studio. Like all feature animation does not work the same as Disney, and it all, you know, feature films don't work the same way as Sony or whatever. Like all of these places, they all have a very different system set up. So the general job is the same. However, yeah, you're right. Like there's definitely like differences between the studios and what they expect.
that's
And that's something that
interesting.
we talk a little bit about too in my class towards the end when we get into the portfolio building section and kind of knowing your audience and knowing exactly what that means. Because yeah, a visual development artist at Pixar has a completely different job than a visual development artist at DreamWorks. And knowing that is really important to you finding your place and being able to build a portfolio that is for what you want to be doing.
Really, I didn't know. I was looking at that question and I was like, I hope Vicky has a good answer for this because I have no idea. Like when
Yeah.
you look on your IMDb and stuff like that, or
Mhm.
you get your credits, sometimes you're in the art department,
Yeah.
sometimes you're in the animation department, sometimes you're in visual effects. I don't
I
even.
mean, like that stuff is like just a producer is like, I think it's this. And then, yeah, that's pretty much how that goes.
That's interesting. You brought up portfolios briefly, and like how you'll discuss those near the end of your class. The
Yeah.
next question we have is I've seen a lot of great visual development portfolios where there's been a distinct world to show off for their
Mhm.
art. And then do you consider it to be, do you encourage people to have continuity or be more diverse with the work in their portfolio?
That's a great question. For me personally, I'm a very diverse artist. Like
Hmm.
that was a strength of mine when I started working at Disney. Was they were like, "Well, you can do a lot of different things," but that's not necessarily true for everyone. And I think that what's most important in that sense is being true to yourself. And me as an artist, like I'm very kind of all over the place. I love to experiment. I love to do new things. I like to try different techniques. And so the fact that my portfolio was very diverse was a reflection of who I am. It's not so much about here's what's appropriate for a portfolio. It's also about like here is my authentic self that I'm showing to you. So if you have a very consistent style, I think that's fine. I think it's fine to kind of stick with that and make that your portfolio because I think the thing is everyone's always looking for like what is the perfect recipe? What is this, perfect amount of, character designs and perfect amount of environment designs to make this one portfolio that is going to get me that job. And I understand where that comes from, but I think thing about a portfolio, a unique designer, and that means that you have to be as authentic to yourself as possible in order to actually show that about yourself. Because if you just try to create this like perfect kind of portfolio, it's going to be really bland. It's going to be really, it's not going to stand out in any way. So like for me, like one of the portfolios that I saw recently that was really exciting had a bunch of ceramic sculpture in it, and it was very abstract and very like unusual and didn't apply necessarily for the job that we were, seeking, but I loved it so much because it just had this unique flavor and this very special, like this person as a designer is a unique person, and I'd rather have someone who has ideas than someone who can just render something really well.
For me, I always felt like I kind of distilled it in a slightly different way, which was, how many people can do what you do to that
Mm-hmm.
level, and then
Yeah.
how much demand is there for that thing? That kind of that I feel can encompass specialists and
Mm-hmm.
and really great generalists as well.
Yeah.
Like how many people can do all these general things to that level that this person can
Right.
do? Like Marcelo
Mm-hmm.
Vignali does like everything, or Corey
Yeah,
Loftus,
exactly. Mm-hmm.
these kind of people. But not a lot of people can get up to that level, and there's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
demand for it, right? So
Right.
it's like the specialness uh, and the demand that
Mm-hmm.
can really, really play a huge role in how much you specialize or generalize, or what
Mm-hmm.
kind of things you put in your portfolio.
For
Yeah.
sure. I think this next question I really like because I think you just posted on Instagram recently about the tools that you're using right now.
Mhm. Yeah.
I think it's really, really a unique approach that you take. And it's
Mhm.
awesome. So the next question is from Ashney, and it is: does the popularity of a tool change the where it does? This is a little bit worded weird. Does the popularity of a tool change the industry? Is it necessary to use software such as Photoshop or FOSS such as Blender? Okay, as well. What's
Hmm.
your opinion on FOSS?
Hmm. Well, I do think that it does change like the technique a little bit. Like for example, when I was at Disney, we had a couple people, literally two, who used Painter still. Everyone else
Mm-hmm.
was on Photoshop. And the nice thing about everyone using Photoshop is that we can all share tools, we can all share brushes, and we can all, understand each other's file system and how it all works. But there are definitely tools that like if you're comfortable with them and it's something that people don't use, I think it's absolutely fine to just kind of use that thing. And even if it's obscure and even if it's something that like people don't get, um, keep doing it. Like if you figured out a really great technique in Clip Studio Pro that gives you like really great images, that's really what matters. Like how you get there doesn't matter. Like half the people at Disney were still drawing on paper. And
Mm.
I stopped drawing on paper since like 2012, like I don't draw anymore. But it's still like their work, even if they're just doing like a pencil rendering, is just as valid as my like Photoshop painting. As long as you're communicating visually, then your tools don't super matter, I think. It's just whatever you're comfortable with.
And
I,
that's
I
visual
also,
development, right?
sorry, Matt, I also
Go
want
ahead.
to bring up SketchUp
Mhm.
because, as we were talking a little while ago, a couple minutes ago,
Mhm.
everybody can see you messing around with SketchUp. So can
Yeah,
you can you kind
Mm.
of explain how that is used in your workflow?
totally. So CG and 3D is, I think, a really, really great thing to learn when you're a student because it's so hard to learn once you're like working professionally because these tools are just so complex and there's such a different way of thinking that if you can learn 3D now, do it. Um, However, I did not. Like, I didn't learn 3D until after I was out of school. And the reason I use SketchUp is because it's kind of 3D for dummies. Like, it is so straightforward and simple and limited. Like, you cannot do what you can do in Maya with SketchUp. However, because of its limitation, it's perfect for what I need it for. So I'll usually, if I have a complex architectural piece, like for the Frozen, when I was doing Frozen, there's a room with an angled window, and trying to plot that out in perspective and make that communicate was going to take me so long. So because I had SketchUp, I was able to kind of, build a quick model and be able to see like, okay, here's how that angled window actually works in perspective. I can now actually get to my drawing in the actual actual concept much faster than I would have if I had to just draw traditionally. I encourage the use of these types of tools. I actually think that like drawing in perspective in the like traditional sense is eventually going to go away just because like we all have these tools that get us there so much quicker.
So do you teach like how you use SketchUp and what you use it
Um,
for in the class?
yeah,
I
I think
forget.
in the class I do. In the class I have a perspective class where we go over some basic SketchUp stuff. However, the interesting thing about tools and the way that they change is that SketchUp now, so like when I recorded the class, it was still like a downloadable app, but now it's actually like a web-based app, which is more uncomfortable for me to use, but it still functions. And the nice thing about SketchUp is that it is so easy to learn that you can just watch a couple videos, and if there's anything that is too complex for you to necessarily do right away, it's really easy to figure out how to do it later.
And it's a free program still,
And it's
right?
free, yeah, which is great. It's amazing for that reason. Again, like the entry level is so low, and the learning curve is really low. So I really like it for those reasons.
Okay, that's great. Another question here from Alex is, do you feel like we're facing a growing trend towards unpolished or ugly art?
Hmm.
Interesting. And if so, how can you adapt as developing artists to this shorter audience's attention span?
Hmm. Okay, so I think that I understand the question. I think that
Yeah.
he's asking about like naive art, like art that's
Yeah.
not necessarily from people who are super trained. And I don't know that it's a growing trend. I think that it's a thing that's always been around. So if you guys watch Bob's Burgers, the
Yeah.
guy who made that show actually created another show much earlier on called Home Movies, and that is a very like unattractive show. However, like because his writing is so strong and the characters were so funny, like it works in the same way that Bob's Burgers is not like the most attractive, appealing character design, but they are funny and they work. So, I think that that's just something to consider when you're making stuff that you want to do. Like when they say ugly, I think of like Rick and Morty, and yeah, it's ugly, but it's also ugly for a reason. Like they're kind of going for this like Mad Magazine, crazy science fiction character thing, and so it's ugly on purpose. If it's just ugly for no reason, then I think that that's a lot harder for anyone to wrap their minds around. But I don't think that most films approach things that way, like even TV shows. Like I think that they're trying to do something, and even if it is ugly, it's ugly on purpose.
And just to kind of like go over exactly what you were saying, Vicky, I just want to make sure I understand. There are some things where they're so ugly or so cheesy or whatever, all of a sudden it's awesome again, right?
Right, yeah. Like, have you seen the TV show Super Jail?
No.
Oh man, it's like this Adult Swim show that is so ugly that it is like hard to watch, but because it's so ugly, it like has its own kind of humor to it. Like there's something so over the top, and like the fact that they just don't care. Like there's something really amusing about that. So yeah, I think that you're right. Like there's definitely like kind of a bell curve where it's like like the uncanny valley was like, oh, you come back up again. And that's kind
Yeah.
of, I think, true for, things that are unattractive. Like there's definitely like a uncanny valley, but then there's the other side of it where it's like, oh, now it's funny again.
Right. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah, like a
All right.
movie for me would be Army of Darkness. It was like so kind of cheesy or whatever to the point
Yeah.
where it was like awesome
Yeah.
after. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's all these movies who try to do that, but like they don't quite go far enough. Like Skyscraper was like trying to do that, but then they didn't like lean into it hard enough, so then it wasn't quite as funny. So it's definitely one of those things where, I always say, especially in design, you need to go too far and then come back. Because
Oh.
it's too easy. Because like if you're tiptoeing up to this thing that is kind of supposed to be over the top, and then you're just like, oh well, here I'm getting closer and closer and closer to it. Like you'll never reach it, and then you'll never really find where that limit is.
Do
So
you,
yeah, I always think that like that's true in design too. Like you need to push it so far that it is ridiculous, and then come back to be like, okay, well, where does it stop being ridiculous, and then starts working again.
is that part of your warm up brainstorm process?
Yeah, definitely. I think because like in design, it's really easy to have an idea and be like, that's the one, that's the idea. I'm gonna go with that. Like for example, when I was working on Frozen, I spent 6 months doing the castle design. And it wasn't like 6 months of like, oh, here's the design, let's move it forward, and etc. It was literally just like 6 months of concept.
Wow.
I just ran out of ideas. Like I was like, I don't know. I drew 1,000, and now what? And the thing that I realized was that I wasn't pushing myself far enough because, I had these very safe designs, and that was fine. But then, like, when I was like, you know what? Screw this. Let's like just go all out. Let's go crazy. Let's see like what are the limits of what this could be? How crazy can it get? And then, I finally found a second wind in that design process where I was like, oh, right, like there is so much more I could do. There's so many more depths to plow. It's not just this kind of surface level. Here's all of my like kind of safe-ish ideas. It was a lot of them, most of them didn't work. Almost none of, like, obviously there's one ice castle in the movie and not the thousands that I drew.
Wow.
But, having that ability to kind of push past and being like, okay, I've drawn this same one 4 times. I need to draw a different, like, what's a different take? And that can be really easy at first, but then like once the months start wearing on, you're like, oh God, like what else do I have in me? And yeah, so I really think that like being able to be like, okay, I'm not going to make sure that this is a nice drawing. This is going to be a crap drawing, but it's going to be like the craziest idea possible. And then there's always something there that you can be like, oh, well, that's a really crazy idea, but like maybe these elements are going to work. And then you can pull that back in and then have something new and interesting.
That's like breaking the rules entirely of what a castle can be, right?
Right, exactly. Like at some point I was like, you know what if it's like Eschery, like all the perspective is all weird and messed up, and and that idea, there's so much in there that you could do. And yeah, a lot of it doesn't work because a lot of it's so unclear. Like you're like, what is happening here? Like this isn't even a picture I can read anymore. But like there is something there that kind of works, and then you can kind of pull that back in and try to make it like very legible instead of kind of this wild idea.
All right. I got another good question for you. Do you think it is important to have storytelling, screenwriting skills, or foundations when working on visual development?
No, I actually don't. I think that
Really?
those things can help. Those things can be really, really useful because being able to kind of understand story is really important. But I don't know that you need to actually understand screenwriting, because screenwriting is its own art. And, I've been diving into writing more. So I kind of have a vague familiarity with it. And there are certain rules in screenwriting that I just think are not useful for you as a visual development artist to know. But I do think it is important for you to understand some aspects of storytelling, right? Like what is the 3-act structure? What does Dark Night of the Soul mean? Like those aspects of storytelling can be really important because then it'll kind of help plot you along, because like, oh, there's this sequence where there's this setting and it is in this part of the story. Then you can actually be like, okay, well, here's what needs to be communicated in this element of the story. So I do think that like basic storytelling knowledge is really important, but I think that like actual screenwriting and maybe like the real nitty gritty of writing is not as important for visual development.
But let me just add this though. Don't you find that a lot of amazing visual development artists, they also have a secondary interest, whether it's like medieval armor or, anatomy of
Yeah.
whatever, they tend to have like another big interest, right?
Yeah, no, and I think that that's, again, that's part of that development of yourself as a like fully fleshed out person, someone with depth, is that you have to have those interests. And I think that if you are interested in storytelling and you are interested in screenwriting, it's not going to hurt you. But I don't know that it's like, oh, this is a thing that you need to do first.
It's like a bonus.
Yeah, I do think that like if you don't have secondary interests, I think it can limit your work and limit your ability to create new and interesting things. Like if you do have an interest in medieval armor, like a lot more about how that stuff is going to work, and you're going to bring that to the table every time. So like for example, I had this interest in sewing dolls clothes, and getting really, really into the details of like how do you cut patterns and how do you do those things. And when we were designing the dresses for Tangled, there were certain elements that like didn't actually make any sense, because like if you were to actually make those pieces of clothing, they don't work, because like when you're doing a CG model, it's not like you actually build the clothing, you just sculpt it, it's just sculpted onto a figure. So like because I had this interest in sewing and pattern making, I was able to look at something and be like, actually you would need to have like certain seams here and then these kinds of cuts and those types of things. So yeah, those types of interests can always really, really help develop you as an artist and give you like an extra tool when you need it.
There's a question here that has risen to the top that I think is an interesting one we haven't had before. Um, I have chronic back pain, and I'm scared no company will hire me because I often need to rest. Could I compensate it with quality work?
Have you ever had back pain or arm pains, Vicky?
I mean, yeah, I think that anyone who does this job, like we need to acknowledge the fact that this is a physical job. Like
Mm-hmm.
if you are doing comics, most people will get like really gnarly wrist injuries. Like this is something that is not uncommon, and back pain is something that a lot of people deal with and can be very difficult. Can quality work balance it out? I do think so, but it definitely has to stay on track with production, and it depends on like where you are in the production cycle. That sometimes that's more forgiving and sometimes it's less. I'm a production artist, which means that I was more art department than concept mostly, and that job is much more demanding in terms of like, okay, you have to turn in this number of things by this week. But if you're working in the early portion, right, like when I worked 6 months on this ice castle, I didn't have a certain quota. I didn't have to do like 100 a week or whatever. It was more like, I don't know, come up with some good ideas. And if you're in that stage of the production, it's way more forgiving and you can totally compensate in terms of ideas and quality work. It's just going to depend on where you are in the production scheme and how much you can define yourself as an artist that they need to have at that stage, right? So for me as a production artist, I was really versatile because they can kind of plug me in anywhere. But there are certain artists at the studios who are much more focused on the early development stuff, and people want them for that because they have such a unique voice. So if you want to be in that position where you are always in the early development stages, you kind of have to be someone who comes up with really cool ideas and is someone who is a very not necessarily someone who's doing props and stuff like that. You have to be that person who's actually like coming up with really exciting new pieces.
And there are like there's a lot of character designers that I know that work on multiple projects
Yeah,
all at the same time. And
totally.
so they're not full time on any project.
Hmm.
You know, I've had to deal with arm problems and back problems for years, and only like in recent years, like last year, it started to get better.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, so during those times, I would still work on projects,
Hmm.
but they would be shorter term. Uh,
Yeah.
But the other thing that I want to mention to Anonymous here is that I too thought that, oh, therapy doesn't work, right? So then
Like
I could,
physical therapy.
yeah, well, at first it was acupuncture.
Hmm.
You know, I was going to acupuncture a lot, and that didn't seem to work. I was spending a lot of money. And then
Hmm.
I didn't stop there, though. I went to physiotherapy, and then I
Hmm.
went to massage therapy, and then I
Yep.
started combining the different ones. And yeah, it costs a lot, but at the same time, it's like, well, you gotta fix yourself
Yeah, you
before.
have to take care of your
Mm.
instrument. This is like, if this stops working, like you have no ability to actually do anything. So you have to take care of yourself.
Yeah, if it's just getting worse and worse, like you gotta really think, okay, how do
Yeah.
I slow things down and fix myself
Hmm.
before it just becomes too much of an emergency to constantly work, 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 work.
Yeah. So I'm going to do a quick plug here because it's relevant. This book, Draw Stronger, is a
Oh.
really great resource for anyone who is suffering from any kind of pain, or even if you're not. It's a really, really good book for exercises, ways to take care of yourself, ways to there's even like workout kind of techniques because you have to take care of yourself. And this is a really great book that shows you like hand exercises, wrist exercises, and even like light cardio because the truth is that if you sit all day, like yeah, you're going to feel not great. And it's not just your body, it's like your spirit too. Like when I
Mm-hmm.
don't work out, I feel like gross and I can't do work as well as I could. So this is a book I highly recommend to anybody who is either has pain or is concerned about pain, especially because yeah, working in visual development at a demanding job can actually exacerbate a lot of things. So highly recommended. You can get it on Amazon.
And for those people that are listening to this off of podcasts, it's called, what is it called?
Draw Stronger.
Awesome.
And it is by Creata Wilberg. And it's a really great little resource. It's like a little short book. It does a lot of really great diagrams and how to hold your sit better, like to take care of yourself and your hands and your back and all that stuff. So
that's incredible.
I've been using it a lot because I am undergoing a really big project right now with a really crazy deadline. So I'm like, I know I'm going to hit that deadline because that's who I am.
Yeah.
However, I don't know that I can hit the deadline without injuring myself. So in order to do that, I'm making sure at this stage, before I hurt myself, that I'm taking care and making sure that I'm, doing all my exercises and, trying to do the best I can.
You're
That's
so
wonderful.
Methodically hardcore, Vicky. It's great.
Methodically hardcore. That's a great phrase. I like it. I'm really glad someone asked that question. That really is really important to a lot of artists, and we don't talk about it enough.
Yeah, if I may, just like before we go on to the next question, I also want to plug a book that I have no affiliation with, but I've read and it's helped me. It's called The Placebo Effect by Dr. Joe Dispenza. And he talks about how the placebo effect works and how to harness that to consciously give yourself placebos to help heal yourself.
Huh, interesting.
Yeah, because he also talks about that the mind or the body also has its own mind, right? It will flex muscles and they won't relax whether you like it or not. So this helps to dive into that.
Cool.
Awesome. Yay for books. All right, let's ask another couple of viewer questions here. This one's another good one from Anonymous. How do you decide color schemes for characters that help represent them? And how do you use color for symbolism?
Yes. That's a great question. And I think a lot of people, we've heard all that like pop science stuff where it's like yellow and red make you want to like leave a room or something. And, I don't think that those things are necessarily untrue, but I think that when you're working on a film or a project, like if you're doing a comic book or TV show, you want to zoom out first and look at your entire story and what is that color message going to be in it. So I really love the Art of Pixar books where they show you all of their color keys, right? You can like see, okay, here's the entire movie in terms of emotion and color. And then you start to zoom in little by little. So you have to start from the big story, and then you can kind of start moving in like, okay, and then this sequence that takes place at this point of the movie is going to have these colors in it. And then, et cetera, et cetera. So then you start building rules for yourself. Then you're like, okay, well, in this story, blue is going to represent happiness. Why not? Like, sure, that's not the go-to, but if you establish that as a rule and you repeat it enough times, your audience is going to understand it. And so first I would take the entire project, zoom out, do an entire like kind of color plan for that. And then you want to think, what do you want to say about your character in this color plan, right? So like, let's say that blue equals happiness for you. Do you want to say that your character starts from a place where he's unhappy and therefore is like consistently in like warm colors, and then gradually as the film moves on becomes happy and then moves into cool colors? Is that something you want to say? Or what is the journey of the character throughout this story, and how does it relate to your kind of overall color scheme? So yeah, that's basically how I would do it.
I just want to make a correction because somebody corrected me in the comments. Thank you very much. The title of the book is not The Placebo Effect, but You Are the Placebo. Sorry. All right. Okay. Let's keep going.
There you go. That's awesome. Well, this is another popular question, and you do a lot of you got a great Instagram following. You post all the time, and it's lovely. Do you have any tips for people wanting to develop a healthy Instagram following?
Yes, that is a great question. And the biggest things you got to do when you're developing an Instagram following is to be consistent and post like once a day. I know that that's really hard and demanding and nearly impossible for a lot of people, but I think that it doesn't necessarily mean that every single day you have to post like a big beautiful painting. You can even post like little sketches, and people are going to respond to that. People really want to see your day and who you are as a person and kind of watch you grow. So even if you just have like, I don't know, like a little post-it note sketch or something.
What about lunch? What about lunch posts?
Yeah, I mean, if you have the time for that, like do it
No, I
100%
meant like of your lunch.
of your lunch. Yeah, I mean, if that's part of like your whole thing, like you're like, I love food, I don't know if you follow Mayumi, uh, Mayumi
Yeah.
no say on
Mm-hmm.
Instagram, but she
Yeah.
she takes like these amazing food photos, and I love her art, but I also actually really love to see her food photography.
You know what I really loved was when you painted your favorite meals. You had a couple little sketches of
Oh yeah,
paintings you did of your food. That's a great way to show your lunch off.
yeah, mhm. Yeah. I mean, that's another way you could do it. You could draw your lunch too.
But then there's also that kind of balance between like I'm all about consistency.
Mhm.
But then lately I've been like, I need to take more time on my
Mm.
posts. At least to at least a
Yeah.
portion of them, there's stuff that suits quickness, but then there's
Mhm.
stuff where it's like, I need to spend some time on this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Instagram is such an interesting thing for artists because I do think that there's all this pressure to like build a following and be really active and do all this stuff. But at the same time, like how much is that really feeding into you and your goals? Like
True.
um is what you're doing helpful for you in the long run, or is it just something that you want to do that is going to affirm you in a more emotional way? So I don't think that either there's nothing wrong with either of those things, but I do think that it's a very knee-jerk reaction to kind of be like, I need to have a giant Instagram following. Whereas like for me, I'm actually pulling back from Instagram a little bit more. Like I am posting, but I'm not as strict with myself as I used to be. There were periods of time when I'd be like, I have to post every day, I have to post a painting every day, and like I felt like in the end that was actually taking more from me than it was giving. So
Hmm.
I feel like social media is one of those things where you have to be really careful because it can be so seductive and feel so good when it's happening, because that instant feedback, yeah, every time you get a little like that feels
Yeah.
great, right? But
Yeah.
like you have to be able to remove yourself from the equation for a little bit and think, is this serving me? Like
Hmm.
I think about Marie Kondo all the time, and does this spark joy? And I think that we need to do that for ourselves, not just in terms of like our ownership of things, but how we spend our time. And for a lot of people, this Instagram stuff is not sparking joy. So I would
Hmm.
be like, you know what? Don't bother. Like there's definitely some good things that come from being really active on Instagram and having a good following, but at the same time, there's a lot of really successful artists who don't even have websites. Like you can be fine without it. Like this is not a huge keystone to your career.
Now I
So,
can almost hear the people that don't live in like the hub of
yeah.
the art community wherever they
Hmm.
are, going. But what about us? Nobody's gonna
Yeah.
know us if I don't post something online because there's no art around my area.
Yeah, and I don't think that that's wrong either. I just want to, I just think that like if you're going to do it, like make sure that it's serving you in some way, And I think that for me, like I came up on the internet back when it was online forums were the thing, like
Hmm.
that was all about posting your art and getting critique and stuff like that from other artists,
I think
and
that's
that
how we knew each other in the
yeah,
very, very
exactly. That's how
beginning.
we know each other. So, I think that the internet can be hugely helpful, and you can meet so many people that you'd never meet otherwise, and you can expose people to your artwork. And as long as that is something that's working for you and is bringing you joy and is building you up, then I think that absolutely keep doing it. I don't encourage anybody to leave any of these social media platforms because I am
Yeah.
big on Twitter and I love Instagram. I love these things, but I also know that they can be really stressful for a lot of people and feel like there's so much pressure to perform, to be this person who is making art for other people as opposed to making it for yourself. So yeah, like I do think that the downside to Instagram is that it does make art such a performative task. It becomes more about something that it's not really about. And I think as long as you're honest with yourself and you're true to your own goals and you know whether or not something is making you happy or not, then either keep doing it or don't. Like for me, I'm never going to leave Instagram. I'm never going to leave Twitter because so far those things have made me really happy, and I've met a lot of great people and I've been exposed to a lot of great art. So I just think that it's really harmful when a lot of people feel like, oh my God, I have to be big on Instagram. I have to
Yeah.
post every day. Like that can actually hurt you. So I think that those two things are both true.
That makes a lot of sense. Like I don't use Instagram very much right now, and it was one of those things that I was like, am I doing this art for likes or am I
Yeah,
doing this art to get better? And I
right.
draw almost every day. I'm working on projects for clients, but what do I need people to know? You know?
Yeah,
And so for
yeah.
me it became like there might be this chapter in my life where I want to take a picture and show people, but
Mhm.
there was such a pressure to feel like I was marketing myself.
Yep.
And how would you speak to that? How it's there's an authenticity to the way you post, I guess is what I'm
Mhm.
trying to get at. And how do people maintain that and not try so hard to like sell themselves?
I think that if it works for you, it does. Like some people are really, really imposters, and they're kind of build this brand for themselves. And I think that like I'm not that person. I don't post every day. I post when I
Mm-hmm.
want to share something that feel is something worthy of that. So I think that that's where that authenticity comes from. Is like I'm not forcing myself. I'm
Yeah.
not like you have to do this. It's more like oh well, I have something and I'd like to share it. However, as you're building a following, that can be a little bit more difficult for you to kind of get to that place. But yeah, no, absolutely. I think that that's one of the things that comes with this territory of being an artist now is like, yeah, that feeling that we have to constantly be marketing ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
constantly be on, and and I don't know how to get around that yet. Like I'm still
Yeah.
very much like in that world too. Like I feel those same pressures where it's like, oh well, now especially that I'm freelance, like I get most of my work through just people finding my stuff online. So
Sure.
it is really important that I share it. It is really important that it's there and that people are interested in working with me. So yeah, I don't know that I have a good answer for it because I think that both of those things are true and I still struggle with that too.
It's
You
still
know,
great advice.
I really feel like this generation is like the generations that's going to deal with the most mental kind of issues, like you know what I mean? Like there's so much pressure, there's trolls,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
we're so connected that the noise never stops. And for many of us that might not be as, strong-willed or just have too much pressure or whatever. You could be a completely normal person. You start going on social media and you get depressed, you get all messed up, you get super like
Yeah.
FOMO every time you see a premiere of,
Mhm.
oh, whatever rap party, and you're like, "Ah,
Yeah.
I wish I was there."
Yeah.
Yeah, it's such a funny kind of space now. So now, for the last like year, I just been trying to just post positive little quotes, to kind
Mhm.
of
Yeah.
like cheer people up.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that that's what the cool thing about the internet right now is that there are both sides of it, right? Like, there's obviously the like giant cesspool of like nonsense people who are, I don't know, comics gating and like, I don't know, like there's too much diversity in comics or whatever. And you're like, oh God, like that's so icky and I don't like it. But on the other hand, there is such a huge community of really supportive will be someone out there of that thing that you do. So
Still there, Vicky? Kind of broke up. Did it break up on your side too, Matt?
I it did. I'm still here.
Yeah, just to, I'll take this time right now just to
hello?
apologize about the audio. Uh, we are doing this over the internet, so sometimes the connections can break up a little bit. Vicky, you back?
What?
Oh, there
Yeah,
you are.
hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
No
Sorry,
one?
we just lost you
Okay,
for a
cool.
sec.
Um okay, yeah, I don't know where I was, but
We could just go on to
yeah,
the next question.
yeah.
Yeah. There's a couple more good ones in here I want to get to before we leave. Um, One of these here about creating characters that have cohesiveness across the characters.
Mhm.
Uh, Bree asks, what aspects of design you feel most easily make a series of characters feel cohesive without sacrificing their individual looks or their silhouette, so to
Yeah.
speak?
I think that level of exaggeration is probably the thing that's going to keep things either consistent or different, right? So like
Mm.
if you're doing Kim Possible, like all the characters have the same level of exaggeration. And if you're doing Disney films, all the characters have the same level of exaggeration, right? Like even though you are doing a lot of interesting shapes and a lot of really pushed silhouettes, both of those films are, you know, those things are very different from each other. And the thing that keeps them together is how far that they're willing to go with certain things and how not far.
That's a really good tip. I like that. So you would say if a character is over exaggerated, like you've got your big bad guy who's over exaggerated,
Right.
you'd probably have the same, like in Hercules, for instance, like
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Like if you exaggerate one character too far and then none of the other characters are that exaggerated, they're gonna feel like they don't fit. But
Okay.
if they're all really exaggerated, like they're all like, I don't know, up, you know, like, the up character designs are super, super pushed. And, you know, if they're all like that, then they all fit, you know, like Carl's basically it still works because Russell is an egg. You know, like those are very simple shapes. Because they both are pushed really far, they work. However,
Yeah.
like, you know, they wouldn't work if we stuck them into like Rapunzel's world, right? Like, those were like super weird. You'd be like, okay, that doesn't work. And yeah, I think that that's basically how to kind of keep a consistent feel.
Hey,
Okay.
wow, the time flies. I just noticed it's 3 p.m. or 3:01 over here where I am anyways.
Yeah.
So that's all the time that we have today. I did want to give a big shout out to my co-host Matt, and the biggest shout out goes to the wonderful, the amazing, the super talented Victoria
Yay,
Ying.
Vicky.
Go
Thanks,
check
guys.
out our class on Schoolism, Introduction to Visual Development. This is the class that everybody wanted, and now it's here. So go and check it out. I'm going to play a little trailer of Vicky's class so everybody gets a bit more of a taste of it. So thank you very much, everybody, and we'll see you
Thanks,
guys
folks.
next time.
Thank you guys. Thanks for having me.
Hi, my name is Victoria Ying, and welcome to my class, Introduction to Visual Development. I worked on the films Tangled, Wreck-It Ralph, Frozen, Big Hero 6, and Moana as a visual development artist. And now, I'd like to share some of the things I've learned with you. The art of visual development is more than just technique. Design is about thinking, and in this 9-week course, I will teach you how to think and design with intention. As artists, our primary goal is visual communication. In this class, we will focus on the principles of design and give you an overview of the skills needed for effective visual communication. I will cover the basics of design thinking, character design, color theory, perspective, and will share tips and techniques that I use personally in my own work. I hope you'll join me on this journey. I'm excited to share my process and my work with you. See you soon on Schoolism.com.